It's not every show that gets a presidential endorsement. Mr. Biden, tell us what you think about the Brad and John show.
These are the kind of guys you like to smack in the ass.
It could have been worse. He might have tried to bite Brad on the knee. Now it's back to Brad and John on the BJ show.
Bing, bing, bong, bing. Bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to call or text Jason Rosenbaum in the break there because Shelley called me and she wanted to know what we're talking about this morning. What are we talking about, John?
Well, what Shelley can do is she can go, I know she follows us on Instagram. She can go to our Instagram page, and after the show, she can read the quick and concise summary and see exactly who and what we're talking about. And where could she go to listen to see the YouTube videos? Is there one domain we have that points people to exactly where they need to go?
bjshow.video, bjshow.video. And if you want to listen to the podcast, you can go to bjshow.co. That's got the podcast. bjshow.video has the podcast, but essentially it's in video format on YouTube. Okay, a couple things about NPR. I'm listening over the weekend, and once again, every single day that they do their regular programming, like you listen to what I don't know what they call their morning show. Is it All Things Considered? I know that's the afternoon show, All Things Considered. Okay, the drinking game is, if you hear the term global climate change, if you started at the top of every hour, by the top of the next hour, you would be drunk because it's everywhere. Okay. But I noticed over the weekend, they have modified that term when they talk about this on NPR. And you know what the new term is?
No, I don't.
Human-caused global climate change.
Oh, there we go. The blame has to go somewhere, Brad.
Right, because of the fact that, let's be honest, there's all sorts of climate change, which if all the humans were wiped out on the face of the earth, things would still change. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I say that because of the fact that, why do we have weather forecasters? Because if the weather was going to stay the same all the time, we wouldn't need, Dave Murray, who doesn't live here anymore, or any local people. We just wouldn't need them, okay? But the fact is, it changes all the time. And I always bring up the point that people talk about, oh, look at what's happened in the last 20 years. I still go back to the fact that if you go back in the history of St. Louis and you look at the top 10 highest temperatures ever recorded in St. Louis, I believe 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10 were recorded either in the 1930s or the 1950s. And I believe the record was actually set in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was like 114 degrees. Okay, so here's the story that I heard this used on. They're talking about the fact that they're having all these people on the East Coast. And, and I'm not trying to be a jerk when I say this, but, this horrendous thing has happened where all these people's beachfront homes are being destroyed by global warming. That the waves are gotten bigger and the waves have toppled some of these homes and brushed them into the ocean. Okay, first off, let's be honest. If you build your house on the ocean front, guess what? You have a problem because of the fact that even though if it's way up the New England coast, if it's way up, like in the New York, Connecticut area, way the heck up there, we still have hurricanes that hit that. Wasn't it the superstorm Sandy that hit New York City a couple years back? That was the incredible.
Yeah, you're right, Brad.
Right. Okay. So, and once again, it's like the people who build their homes in, let's say, Times Beach, or let's say in Pacific, or let's say in Valley Park, okay?
Or let's say, let me interrupt, or let's say people who, build a high school for Eureka students right at the bottom of a floodplain.
Which is sort of interesting as well, too. So, once again, the thing that cracked me up is I had someone comment on this last week, and they found it interesting because they didn't believe my story. Remember, we had the story last week about, what was that, in Pennsylvania? There was the bridge that has come out of the river because of the fact that drought's so bad.
But that emerged after 200 years.
But the bridge is 200 years old. Okay, once upon a time, they built a bridge over a river, and literally they said it's a 200-year-old bridge. They built a bridge over a river, and for the past 150 years or 100 years, that bridge has been underwater. Okay, so you're thinking like yourself, oh, hold on a minute, let me think about this for a minute. 150 years ago, there were no cars, there were no airplanes, there were no, ozone-producing stuff like that. There were no air conditioning systems, pumping out R22 or R410A or stuff like that. How did that happen? And then, like, for example, every time I drive along 270, and you go back down in what we used to call on the ham radio channels, used to call the rocks, because your signal would always get screwed up when you were down there. On 270, essentially from Doherty Ferry south to 44. You go through those areas where they've cut through the rock, and some spots, the road surface for 270 is probably 40, 50 feet below the rock line?
At least that part down.
Okay, and if you look at the rocks, and once again, in my younger years, I used to be fascinated by geology. You look at all the different layers of sediment rock, okay? And the term sediment is important because once upon a time, there was probably water there. And there was probably water, and if you figure that those layers of rocks at 270 and between Big Bend and 44 are probably, the road surface is probably 100 feet above the water level in Merrimack River, which is down the street. You know, you go down 270 west on 44, you go over the Merrimack River. Okay, so in other words, once upon a time, there was water that was 100 feet taller than the river down there. So that was way back when. There were no humans around, okay? How did that happen? And why all of a sudden has it been called, and maybe this is a chance, but I heard it 3 different times on Saturday, referring to human-caused global climate change. And I'm going okay, whatever. Just whatever.
Because if it's and you know this, Brad, because if it's human caused, then that means that there could be a government policy and hopefully some government subsidies that can help bail us out of this horrible climate predicament that we're in. And I even heard that Donald Trump is considering getting rid of that invaluable EV credit, Brad. I'm sure you're really upset about that.
Well, see, John, once again, if I had money, I'd have an EV. But the interesting thing about that is, you and I talked about this one time before, they did this survey of EV owners, and most of the EV owners had a second car. And and the idea being is,
because you have to,
right? But in other words, here's the interesting thing. Are you a golfer by any chance?
Not at all.
Okay. You know that you have a bag of golf clubs, and if you look at the pros, they have, I don't know, what is it, 14, 15 clubs they can carry. That's the PGA limit. Okay, there's a club for each person, or each purpose. There's a club that when you get into the sand, there's a sand wedge, and there's there's a number 1 driver, and there's a fairway driver and stuff like that. Okay, the reason for that is that it's the same way with cars, that one size doesn't fit all. And for example, that I have cars and I have trucks. I don't drive my trucks all the time. I drive my car most of the time. But yet when I need to haul something, I drive my truck. So they're different things for different reasons and different, things. And it's the same thing with vehicles. And by the way, I saw something over the weekend. Somebody else took my idea. I saw this on a YouTube short. It's this guy who's broke down on the side of the road. And the reason he's broke down is he's driving a Tesla, and he's doing the video himself. I don't know where this was. I need to probably research a little bit more. He's on the side of the road, and his car is not working, and you see the cars are driving by him, but you see a charging plug going into his charging port in the driver's side rear of the car, okay? And he shows where the cord goes, and here's a van with a generator in the back of it, and the sign on the side says mobile vehicle charging, and the guy's got a generator in the back of the back of this van, and he goes around charging people's batteries that ran out and they can't move their car anymore. Is that unbelievable or what? And I had the idea.
It's brilliant, Brad.
But okay.
And don't you think right now at AAA and other roadside assistant places, they have a team that's been working nonstop on this for a while? Because think of how much money you could make if you had a network of folks around the country that would be able to go out. And what a differentiator that is. Hey, we offer roadside assistance not just for a flat tire or you can't start a car, but when your EV runs out of juice.
Well, and see, once again, I'm not an anti-electric guy. I remember when the old days where we did the mouth, there was a guy in Washmo. The guy was a retired college professor, and the guy had taken an old Porsche, I believe it was an old Porsche 914, if you know what the 914s were. An interesting car they've made in the late 60s, early 70s. It was like the poor man's Porsche. And he had taken the engine out of it and put in an electric motor, and he did it himself. And he drove to the station all the time. It was pretty cool. And he turned me on to the movie Who killed the EV? You ever heard this movie before?
No,
I know you're not gonna watch it because I told you to, because the kiss of
Correct.
death. If I said,
is it related to Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
no, it's a movie about back in the late 80s or early 90s. General Motors came out with a all electric car called, I believe it was called the AE1. And what they did was they were testing the market for electric cars, and they never sold the cars. They leased the cars, and they leased the cars, sweetheart lease, to high-profile people. A lot of people in Hollywood got these cars, and essentially they were leased for like $1 or $10 a month or something like that. And essentially what General Motors was, they wanted these people to be like influencers before we knew where influencers were on the internet, okay? And they wanted these people to say, oh my God, I got this great electric car from General Motors, and I love it, and it's great, and it's wonderful. Well, along the line, and it was interesting, nobody really knows the true story behind this. Some people say that the oil companies went to General Motors and said, hey, what the hell are you doing? You got to put us out of business.
Yeah.
Knock it off.
You're not helping our business.
Right, knock it off with these electric cars. So slowly but surely, all the people that had these AE1s, I believe it was AE1s, I have to go back and look at it, they were told by General Motors, guess what, we're going to end your lease and we want the car back. And some of them were going like, I love this car, I want to give it back. And sometimes they literally had to repossess it in the middle of the night. They would send out repo guys to grab these cars. And they took them, they loaded all the cars on car transports. And you know what they did with them?
What?
They crushed them.
Oh.
And there's only like supposedly 2 or 3 of them still in existence. There's one that some guy apparently absconded with that he's got hidden away. Are you familiar with what they call the Peterson Car Museum? You know what Peterson Car Museum is all about?
Yeah, it's Camellia Peterson's dad has a bunch of cars and lawnmowers out back.
She only wishes. The Peterson publishing empire did like Hot Rod magazine. I think they did Motor Trend at one point in time, and they have a very renowned automobile collection out in Los Angeles. And there's one of them in the Peterson collection. And essentially, there's never been a true reason. General Motors has never really answered why they produced this car, gave it all this publicity, gave it to all these fancy Hollywood types, and then all of a sudden grabbed them all back and crushed them. And it's sort of an interesting story. And this, I go back to I'll look it up. And I know this was in the 90s, maybe the late 80s. And there was a movie that came out, a documentary called, Who Killed the Electric Car or something like that. Anyway, interesting stuff. Okay, my thing with NPR again. Okay, unless this has changed, once again, back in the day, if you worked at one of the union radio stations like KMOX or Channel 4, Channel 5, the TV stations as well too, you remember American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, AFTRA, okay? Years ago, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago, the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA merged, so it's one union. Now, the interesting thing about this is some of my radio buddies, and I haven't talked to anybody in about 5 years about this, but they said one of the cool things about being in SAG-AFTRA was you got to vote for the Academy Awards. You were a voting member of the Academy Awards.
Boy, that's very man of the people-ish. So you could have just a rank and file radio employee voting for something that significant. Exactly.
And not only that, get this. Once the nominations came out, the Emmy Association, whatever it was I don't know the name of the group that gives out the not the Emmys, the Oscars. The Oscars are the Emmys are the TV, Oscars are the motion pictures.
Yep.
Once the nominees came out, each AFTRA SAG member got DVDs of the movies so they could watch them.
Oh, nice. And those go right on eBay because you don't even watch them and just post them on eBay. That's awesome.
So why in the world would the NPR folks want to join SEIU when they could have joined AFTRA SAG and be rubbing elbows with all the Hollywood elite? Because all the movie actors are in SAG-AFTRA. And
do you think, hold on, Brad, do you think SAG-AFTRA wants a bunch of public radio nerds excluding their group.
But that's what most of the public radio stations are doing. I read it just the other day. So-and-so public radio goes after it. I mean, they're doing it all over the country. Matter of fact, the running joke is that almost all the NPR stations, I read a report recently, they said that there's probably within the next 2 or 3 years that every single public radio station will be unionized, and the majority of them will be after SAG-AFTRA.
Thank God, Brad. I'm so tired of getting frequent and consistent updates all week long from public radio. They need more union breaks. And I think you should text Rosenbaum about it. If you need his number, I won't give it to you, but I think you could find it and it'd be great. And I bet he'd be able to give you an answer.
Okay. Because see,
why don't you text Elaine Cha very softly, very quietly, very politely? Or maybe you could record a voice note and put it through a Diane Rehm filter and say,
we're trying to figure out why you're joining the guild you did.
Was that Diane Reams or RFK Jr.? Which one?
Yeah. We should talk about RFK because I saw a disturbing video from a Republican who I really like who was praising RFK for all the wrong reasons, Brad.
We can't have that. Why can we? Can't have that. Okay. We have to take a break. Our third segment is coming up, what we call C Block, and it's not where we keep the nasty prisoners. That's in A Block.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T. John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?